war, famine, economic inequality, pollution, corruption, climate change, unaffordability, low-paying jobs, no upward mobility. These are just a few of the issues that the world has been grappling with for years. But, believe it or not, all these issues have a shared cause, and that's inflation. More accurately, the ability to create money out of thin air with the help of a central or commercial bank. Today, I'm going to reveal where all this inflation is coming from, explain exactly how this inflation is causing these issues, and why the solution might require just a single step. Okay, let's start with where this inflation is coming from. Imagine you were given a bank account with an unlimited amount of money. What would you do? Well, you'd probably start by buying a nice house, going on a fancy holiday, getting yourself a very silly car, and all the other things that the average person would do. Once you've had your fun, you would start doing the same for your friends and family, buying them houses, cars, holidays, the whole shebang. Next, you'd probably start donating your money to charities, investing in startups, building cutting-edge tech, and all the other kinds of stuff rich people do. Now, I think we can all agree that spending money on all of the above is an effective allocation of that capital. In other words, it's the right way that money should be spent, improving the quality of life for yourself and others, and then trying to take humanity itself to the next level. Given enough time, however, you'll inevitably start spending your money on stupid stuff. Maybe you'll start buying shitcoins that you know will probably go to zero, or marry a reality TV star, or construct a secret underground layer and try and take over the world. Why? Because you can, or rather because you've run out of ways to allocate that capital effectively. What I've just described is the financial system in a nutshell. When a currency is first created, its purpose is to improve the quality of life of the people using it. The institution that issues the currency is often instructed to ensure that it operates in accordance with this purpose when it is established. Now, this currency issuing institution is a central bank or a commercial bank. Whereas the central bank has the power to print currency, commercial banks have the power to create currency out of thin air through fractional reserve banking, aka lending out more than they have on their balance sheets. The people with exclusive access to these money sources basically have their own bank accounts with unlimited money supplies. This isn't a problem at the start because the private sector uses its accounts to invest in innovation and the public sector uses its accounts to develop infrastructure. As time goes on, however, the stupidity sets in. The people in the private sector engage in reckless financial speculation and enforce their ideologies on society. The people in the public sector purchase political popularity through public programs and increase the surveillance and control of their citizens. All these endeavors require creating lots of currency, and that eventually results in inflation. It also results in a collapse in the confidence of the institutions that issue the currency, including the ones in the private sector that have exclusive access to the institutions that issue the currency. This is why every fiat currency that's ever been issued has eventually failed, and it's why any form of currency created by people is destined to fail. And yes, it is the cause of all the issues I mentioned in the introduction. Now, a topical issue to begin with is war. Any student of history out there will know that when countries go to war, their governments take on unbelievable amounts of debt to finance that war. This is much more significant than you think, and to explain, I'll paraphrase macro analyst Mike Green. When a government must borrow massive amounts of money to do something that it wants, then it's often, if not always, because it's something it knows that its citizens do not want or do not need. It's something that it knows its citizens would not fund with their taxes. If it was something the citizens wanted or needed, then the government would have a much easier job of selling the idea to them. Raising taxes to pay for things people actually want is a lot more straightforward than doing so for something they don't. Not surprisingly, war is very low down on the list of things that citizens of any country want or have ever wanted. However, it has always been and will always be high on the list of things that the powerful public and private people and institutions have wanted because they always want more growth. Now, of course, this urge to grow bigger and better is often a good thing. When you throw the ability to create money into the mix, however, it can become a very bad thing because it opens the door to reckless spending and war. Without the ability for people to create money to finance these wars, they would happen a great deal less frequently. Now, another hot topic these days is climate change. If you watched our video about the UN's upcoming individual carbon credit score, you'll know I briefly noted that inflation is causing this environmental breakdown. One of the comments asking exactly how was in fact the inspiration behind this video. So to recap, inflation ultimately comes from excessive money creation driven by public and private institutions that are abusing their infinite money bank accounts. I suppose this really depends on your definition of inflation, but let's roll with it for the sake of simplicity. In practical terms, inflation means that a currency is losing value by the day. This is simply because the gradual increase in the supply of that currency makes it gradually less valuable. It's basic economics. The more of something you have, the less it is worth relative to other things. So, riddle me this, what happens when people can see that their currency is slowly losing value by the year, by the month, or even by the day? Well, obviously they're incentivized to get rid of that currency by buying something. That's because they know everything else will be more expensive in the future. Now, the effects of inflation are arguably felt most by those with massive amounts of money. That's because a 1% devaluation on $100 is just $1. A 1% devaluation on $100 million, however, is $1 million. That's an amount of purchasing power anyone would notice losing. And because the only way to preserve this purchasing power is to buy something else with that money, that's exactly what the rich do. They use their money to buy assets, and then they borrow money against these assets to buy even more assets, which continue to appreciate in value due to inflation. As we've learned, this infinite money glitch inevitably results in the misallocation of capital, specifically overconsumption. Now, overconsumption is what lies at the core of climate change and all other environmental issues we're experiencing, and the rich are the largest consuming class. Now, don't get me wrong, the urge to consume can be a good thing inasmuch as it keeps the economy going. When you throw an inflation-based infinite money glitch into the mix, however, it quickly becomes a very bad thing because it leads to the kind of overconsumption that destroys the environment. This ties into another big issue that's been fueled by money creation, and that's all the issues with employment. This includes low-paying jobs, the inability to move upwards within those jobs, and jobs where nothing of value is being produced, or to use the scientific term, bullshit jobs. I'll start by saying that the issues in the job market are not due to inflation alone. There are a few other factors involved, including demographics, migration, and globalization. That last factor is probably the primary cause of low wages, since an increase in the supply of labour drives wages down. That said, there still seems to be a very strong correlation between currency creation and depressed wages. This can be seen in this chart here. Some of you may recognize this chart from the website WTF Happened in 1971. Well, 1971 is when fiat currencies officially stopped being backed by gold. To be clear, there was already lots of unbacked fiat currency supply in circulation prior to 1971. The thing is that it hadn't been officially sanctioned, so to speak. Going off the gold standard effectively gave the green light to central banks and commercial banks to create as much money as they wanted. This allowed a handful of corporations with close connections to both types of bank to get their hands on easy money. They used this easy money to expand their empires into other countries and lobby politicians to pass regulations that would prevent any competition from catching up. So, what happens when a corporation can borrow almost as much money as it wants? Obviously, that corporation is less incentivized to care about its actual operations that generate actual income. This includes the employees of the company. If corporations were not able to borrow almost as much money as they wanted, then they would be forced to pay extra close attention to what employees want. This is because they would need to create favourable conditions for productivity, but I suppose this incentive falls apart when globalisation comes into play. In any case, the employment issues caused by inflation are even worse in the public sector. That's because when a government can borrow as much money as it wants to finance its operations, it doesn't need to care much, if at all, about the productivity of its employees. To make things worse, many governments have policies to reduce funding for a department if it manages to do its job within its annual budget. This inadvertently creates an incentive for these departments to spend more money so they can keep their budgets or even increase them. Now, another significant issue being caused by money creation is economic inequality. Economic inequality in almost every country around the world exploded to record highs during the pandemic, and that is not a coincidence. In response to the pandemic, central banks around the world dropped interest rates on borrowing to zero. By now, you'll know that the entities with close connections to central banks and commercial banks were the only ones who were able to borrow at a near 0% rate, otherwise known as free money. These entities used this borrowed money to buy up all the assets they could get their hands on. That's why the prices of houses, stocks, and cryptocurrencies went vertical. As the primary holders of assets, the rich got richer and everyone else saw their hopes and dreams become that bit further out of reach. The worst part is that this dynamic didn't start with the pandemic. It started as soon as the current financial system was created in the aftermath of the Second World War, and it was significantly accelerated by the dropping of the gold standard that I talked about earlier. Now, there's even a phrase for this phenomenon: buy, borrow, die. The elites start by making it big, usually through legitimate means, and then they buy up as many assets as they can. By now you'll know that the elites will then borrow against their assets to buy more assets until they own all the assets. Now, I've done a video on this practice which I will leave linked to below in the description for you. Anyways, once they own all the assets, many of them have nothing better to do than to force the world to comply with their ideology. The best example here is BlackRock forcing its ESG ideology into every institution in the world, despite it being inherently unprofitable. Only possible thanks to money printing. The best part is, though, they pay no tax as part of this process. That's because you only pay tax on something when it's sold, in most countries anyhow. Borrowing against an asset is therefore tax-free because that money didn't come from a sale. It came out of thin air at a low interest rate, courtesy of the banks. Meanwhile, the inflation caused by all this money creation has been destroying the purchasing power of the average person. The unprecedented money creation we saw in response to the pandemic put the pedal to the metal on inflation, and we are continuing to feel the effects of that. Now, as messed up as all these issues are, there's an easy way out of them. That's to take away the ability of central banks and commercial banks to create unlimited amounts of money. One way to do this would be to move to a sound money system, such as one where currencies are once again backed by gold. It doesn't necessarily have to be gold either. I reckon there are ways to back currencies with other commodities and even cryptocurrencies with gold-like attributes, such as BTC. In a sound money system, the only way you can really create money is to produce something of value that someone will give you money for. Because the supply of sound money isn't constantly expanding, that means that the purchasing power will be preserved over time. And not only that, but you'll be able to preserve your purchasing power by just saving. You won't have to invest in high-risk assets that are being manipulated by well-capitalized speculators. Now, the only problem is, of course, that the elites that have their wealth in these assets that they've borrowed against would be wiped out. That's because borrowing in a sound money system would be much more expensive. It would no longer be possible for those with close connections to banks to borrow money for free at close to 0%. This includes governments, which have taken on unbelievable amounts of debt to mostly do things that their citizens do not want and do not need. Now, the rich could probably find a way to unwind their debts. The government, not so much. They would almost certainly default, and it would result in regime change in every country, along with a complete restructuring of government operations. As an added bonus, unaccountable international organizations that are sustained by made-up money would completely dissolve, and their explicit plans to create a centralized global government would dissolve with them. Remember, world domination is only possible through money manufacturing. Now, the only issue a sound money system could possibly create is something called a deflationary death spiral. This is when everyone realizes that their purchasing power is increasing over time, so they reduce their spending to a bare minimum. This does serious damage to the economy. The thing is that this is an issue that's only ever existed in theory, and if you ask me, it's one that's been made up by the elites to scare people away from pursuing a sound money system. In addition, there would still be some inflation in a sound money system since more gold, BTC, etc. is produced every day. It seems that the ideal solution would be to have an algorithmic currency whose supply expands and contracts based on demand. This would make it possible to preserve purchasing power while simultaneously allowing for more currency expansion when it's required by the economy. Unfortunately, the current currency issuers would never allow such a currency to take hold. This includes the stablecoin issuers in cryptocurrency, and you can learn about how one of them is slowly taking over the crypto industry using the link in the description. And that's all for today's video on why inflation, aka money printing, is the root cause of most of the world's problems. If you found this video informative, smash that like button to let me know. If you want to make sure you don't miss the next flick, subscribe to the channel and ping that notification bell. While you wait, you can check out Coin Bureau clips for more from me and tune in to the Coin Bureau podcast for in-depth discussions about cryptocurrency. You can also find me on Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram, and get your dose of daily updates on Telegram. If you're wondering what I see on the horizon for the crypto markets, subscribe to my weekly newsletter to get my forward guidance. And if you want to support what we do, head on over to the Coin Bureau merch store and get yourself some cool crypto merch that will keep you warm this winter. Links to all these resources and more can be found in the description. Thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you next time. Till then, stay cool, or warm, depends on where you are, stay safe, and stay crypto.